This is a story about a young woman named Cairo who seems innocent but harbors a dark obsession. Cairo is beautiful and smart, living alone in an old house while her parents are abroad. Writing is her passion. She walks through the woods to school every day, which fuels her imagination. One day she meets Jonathan, her middle-aged literature teacher. He once wanted to be a writer, but after his books flopped, he turned to teaching. On Cairo's first day, Jonathan assigns books, but she's already read them all, which intrigues him. Another student, Winnie, is Cairo's best friend. After class, Cairo and Winnie grab lunch. Jonathan glances at Cairo's books and finds an adult novel among them. Boris, Jonathan's friend, comes in for coffee and jokingly picks up the book, realizing it's one of Jonathan's old novels. That night, Jonathan tells his wife, Beatrix, about this. She's busy and barely responds because her friend, Amy, called. Jonathan feels ignored and tries to connect with Beatrix later, but her phone rings again, and he gets angry. The next day, Jonathan tells Boris everything. Boris laughs, but then Cairo walks by, and Jonathan is smitten. Lonely, he sees her as someone who could fill the gap in his life. He smiles and asks if she's scared walking in the forest. She replies with a smirk, "The scariest thing in those woods is me." Jonathan laughs, but a bond is forming. Back at school, Winnie drops her books in front of Boris, trying to get his attention. He smiles and asks if she needs help, and she flirts back with a grin. Cairo watches, amused, and calls her crazy. Later, the girls go to Cairo's house. That night, while Cairo fills out an application with the question, "What is your greatest personal achievement?" Winnie jokes about Cairo and Jonathan having an affair. Cairo is taken aback because she sees Jonathan as her teacher. Winnie dismisses this, pointing out that he seems to look at Cairo differently. The next day at school, Cairo wonders if Jonathan pays more attention to her. After class, Jonathan calls Cairo aside. That night, he invites Boris over for dinner, and before leaving, Boris does a silly dance. Jonathan copies it, and Cairo walks in, and they laugh. Later, Jonathan tells Cairo he's impressed by her writing. He's memorized it all. Cairo is surprised. Jonathan asks her to write a short story in the style of her favorite author for extra credit, and she agrees and mentions that she's read his book and remembers lines by heart. This deepens the bond between them, and Jonathan finds himself falling for her. Under the cover of discussing her assignment, he invites Cairo to meet him privately over the weekend. One night, Jonathan and Beatrix are at dinner when Winnie shows up as their waitress. Beatrix is suspicious and quietly asks Jonathan if Winnie is the girl he mentioned. Jonathan denies it, but Beatrix isn't convinced as she realizes that Jonathan is falling for Cairo. That weekend, Cairo arrives at the agreed meeting place where Jonathan soon joins her. As a man on stage reads poetry, Cairo stares at Jonathan. Afterward, Cairo smokes a cigarette, and Jonathan joins her, sharing it in silence. The next day, Cairo walks into class in a striking outfit. Boris even compliments her. Once Boris leaves, Jonathan and Cairo talk, and the tension increases. Then, Jonathan gets a text from Beatrix asking if he wants to go out. The day after, Winnie climbs on Jonathan's desk and teases Cairo about Jonathan, and also flirts with Boris and steals his phone. Cairo finds that her own phone is gone. At Jonathan's house, Beatrix is busy. Jonathan notices he has Cairo's phone, so he decides to return it himself. He arrives at Cairo's house as it starts to rain and Cairo opens the door. They stare at each other, and in a moment of silence, tension, and desire, they kiss. Jonathan leaves soon after, conflicted. Later, Jonathan gets Cairo's draft of her story. Beatrix says she wants to move out because she can't working while living in this house, but Jonathan ignores her and begins to read Cairo's story instead. As Jonathan reads it, a storm of emotions overcomes him. Attraction, guilt, temptation. He knows he has to do nothing. In order to clear his mind, Jonathan chose to stay in the cabin while Beatrix lives in the house. Jonathan opens the story Cairo sent, immediately reading that the story was about a romantic relationship between a student and her teacher. The next day, Cairo hasn't heard from Jonathan and realizes she hasn't reached a call or message from him. when she sees him at school and asks to read her story. He tells her he didn't like it cold. He mentions there were too many errors and that it didn't work for him. She realizes this, so she retorts and mentions that the story is about her and him. Jonathan disagrees with this statement, that there is nothing between them, and reminds her that he is her teacher. This shatters her heart until he tells her not to write stories like that again. She snaps and tells him that the story is perfect and that he is just afraid and is unable to write a story such as that. Later in that night, she drowned her emotions out with wine alongside Winnie. Jonathan opens up to Beatrix by mentioning Cairo's story as he was visibly tense. Cairo vents to Winnie. Rumors spread around school about an affair as Beatrix called Jonathan out on him by telling and asking, "Is the rumor that an actual affair with his student?" And he denied with Beatrix refuses to believe this. The next day, Cairo was in the office because the rumor was so bad that she had to be called down. During the meeting, the vice principal began questioning them. Cairo told everything without hesitation, including the first meeting, sharing a cigarette, meeting outside school, and Jonathan even inviting her out. Jonathan hesitated during his turn to answer. Jonathan's hesitation spoke volumes to what Cairo said, and because of this, he was let go from his position immediately. Even his best friend Boris mentioned he crossed the lines. Meanwhile, Beatrix found out, so she chose to accept the truth. He fired, rumors, and that he was having an affair with her. With all her built-up resentment boiling over, the two confronted each other, but it ended in a worse state. Beatrix told Janatha that she wanted a divorce. But for Cairo, she didn't care that Jonathan lost everything. She had a cold, detached smile with being with that thought in mind. She mentioned that it was all her plans and schemes that came to light. She only found that his ego and thinking that she was weak was his worst demise. With a wicked grin on her face, she thought now Jonathan has no job and no wife. Cairo had plans to now write again, with Jonathan having nothing left. In short, this was a story of a man's demise from their deepest desires that would come to their ends, and the people who are heavily underestimated to an extreme end.